I can't give you specifics. If I did, I might get sued, either by the owner or by the company that owns the chain of hotels that I used to work for. All I can say, in very broad terms, is that if you happen to be staying in a hotel, there are certain room numbers you should avoid. If you can, stay off the 4th floor altogether if you want a good night's sleep. And whatever you do, do not, under any circumstances, even if it's the last place available, allow them to put you in room 44. I used to clean for one of the major hotel chains. They have hotels all over the world, but the ones I worked in were in the UK. I can honestly say that the rooms were so standardized and removed of any distinguishing features that if they had not had numbers on the door, you would not have been able to tell them apart. Same layout, same decor, same tiny kettle and free bags of tea, same number of shower gels and shampoos, same color of sheets and blankets, nondescript, non-threatening and boring, except on the 4th floor. The room 44 that this story is about was not in my original hotel. A couple of folks had called in sick at one of the sister hotels on the other side of the city, and I was asked to change my shift, go over there, and work the cleaning shift in an unfamiliar hotel. I knew before I left that it wouldn't matter, because the rooms would be exactly the same. But when I arrived, something was different. When the shift manager handed over my cart and the rota of rooms for me to visit, I realized that there weren't enough supplies and refills for all the rooms on the list. He smiled at this and told me not to worry. Just miss all the ones on the 4th floor. They're on the list, but you don't need to do them. Just leave them off. Makes your work easier, he said with a smile. Well, I wasn't going to argue, was I? At first, I wondered if this was some kind of superstition. I knew that in China, Singapore and Malaysia, there often wasn't a room or even a floor that had the number 4 on it. You would get in a lift and the numbers just go 1, 2, 3, 5. Or they include a floor that is called 3A instead of 4. They definitely do not have a room 4 or 44. This is because the character for the number 4 is close to the character for death, and there is a strong superstition about the number being deeply unlucky. Maybe, I thought, that was why the rooms on the 4th floor didn't get rented out. As it turned out, the superstition was even more sinister than that. I did my shift, with a bunch of people I didn't know. They were friendly enough and I got chatting to one woman in particular named Mona. On my break, eating a sandwich and chatting with Mona, I happened to ask about the whole "don't go on the 4th floor" thing. Mona went suddenly quiet. She glanced around at her colleagues, who at the very mention of the floor had all gone suddenly silent. They stared in my direction, as if I had just committed some great blasphemy, or said something really offensive. Mona smiled limply, and then leaned in as if she was going to tell me a secret. Lowering her voice almost to a whisper, she told me, "Listen, I can't say anything about why, but trust me, just stay off the 4th floor. Okay, there are bad things up there, okay?" That was it. All the clarification I was going to get. Mona turned back to her own lunch and started quizzing me about people I worked with and whom she also knew. The topic was dropped and I didn't ask again. I worked at the other hotel for a full week, and never once did I venture up to the 4th floor. In fact, I never even mentioned it. It was only at the end of the week, when I was catching the bus home, that I saw Mona get on after me. She spotted me, moved the seat beside me, and we chatted for most of the way home. Eventually I tried again to ask her, this time without the stern looks from her colleagues to prevent her from sharing. At first she was hesitant, but eventually she told me that floor 4 had been abandoned around a year ago after a particular guy stayed there. At first assumed something bad like a death or a murder had happened in the room, but Mona said it wasn't quite like that. Instead she said that the floor had been left to rot, because even after the guy moved out, room 44 is occupied. When I asked what she meant by that, she looked away, checking that there was no one else listening in. By this point there was just us, one old dude at the front of the bus and the driver, so she felt somewhat safe to confide in me. The first few days of his stay, he asked not to be disturbed, so we never went near the room. Eventually though, we figured he'd need new towels and the linens changing, especially since the woman in room 46 had complained of a smell. So, when he went out in the morning, we let ourselves in to clean. Mona shook her head. I only went inside for about 30 seconds, before I closed the door again. Whatever he had been doing in there, some kind of mass or ritual or whatnot, it creeped the hell out of me. It took me about 2 seconds to see where the smell was coming from. The guy had strung up a lamb, as in a full lamb, head, tail, everything, from the light fitting, and had butchered it. It was just hanging there upside down and rotting, the meat falling off the bones onto this big gold plate thing that he'd put below. He'd taken out the tongue and nailed it to the floor. The bed had been pushed up against the wall so that the entire floor space was clear, and he'd made circles all over out of salt and chalk. There were rocks placed at different points, and all these drawings, horrible drawings of these things that looked like animals but walked like people. with mouths in their knees and elbows, and, well, I just shut the door and said to hell with that. I'm not going in there again even if they double my salary. I didn't blame her. I went downstairs and told the manager, and one of my colleagues was sent up to investigate. He went in for about 2 minutes and came out shouting about how there was someone else in the room, even though the guy had gone out hours earlier and it was a single occupancy room. When we asked if it was a man or a woman in the room and what the person had said, he couldn't tell us. He just said that he'd seen a shadow moving in the bathroom, a shadow of a person with long dark hair, crawling around on their hands and knees, like a dog or an animal or something. Later, the guest came back. He went up to his room, and the manager planned to confront him and throw him out. But an hour later, he came down and walked back out of the hotel. He was booked to stay for another week, but we never saw him again. When the manager went up to check the room, there was a brand new lock with 2 padlocks fixed to the outside of the door. The guy must have gone out and bought them and fitted them to the door when no one was looking. The manager set about trying to open the locks and get into the room, but was interrupted by a phone call from the front desk that they said was from the guest. I watched the manager answer that call, and also watched as he turned white. The man apparently told him that there was a djinn in that room. He had summoned a djinn, sort of like a demon or unclean spirit, and had trapped it within the walls of the room, lined with salt and special charms. He said that the thing was bound in there the way that magicians of old would keep a genie or djinn in a lamp or a bottle. He also said that under no circumstances should the door ever be opened again, adding that whoever did and released the djinn would be cursed by it from then on. The regional manager of that particular branch wanted to open the door anyway, but from what I heard he was prevented from doing so by the company owner. The owner, whom I won't name but I will say is highly religious and from a Middle Eastern country, gave the order that the room was to be sealed up with brick and plasterboard as if it didn't exist, and that it should never ever be opened again. For a while after the bricking and boarding was done, the rooms across and next door to room 44 were still rented out, but that soon stopped when the people next door complained of being unable to sleep because of the noise. Apparently, though the room was vacant, the sounds from the guest in room 44 kept the other patrons awake. There was crashing and banging as if someone was trying to break through the walls. Some said there was a horrible wailing and hissing, almost like a child or several children crying out in pain for their mothers. Others said that the person in the next room was keeping some kind of animal in there, and that it growled and roared furiously all night long. After that, the floor was sealed up, and we were told never to go there. Without saying another word, Mona got off the bus. I never saw her again. I also never went back to that particular hotel, but at the start of the next week, I resumed my job at the original site, owned by the same company. What I learned over the next 6 months, however, was that at 7 sites around the world, and owned by the same man, the 4th floor was currently out of order. Someone once told me that the number 4 is significant in magic because of something called the Tetragrammaton, the true name of God that is spelled out with 4 letters, and that's why room 44 would be significant. I was also told by another friend that the hotel chain owner made a lot of enemies on his way up, and that perhaps this practice of having someone go around the world cursing rooms by trapping jinn inside them was a deliberate act of vengeance. Once a jinn is trapped there, it means the man could never sell the building or demolish it for fear of letting the thing out. I'm not sure about any of that, but I do know that if I ever stay in a hotel, I avoid that particular chain. I'm also sure to stay on any floor other than the 4th.